Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and we're back to the cat. Let it stare into your soul, and, yeah, I know the joke is getting old and tired. I really don't care. I just really like this cat. I'm allergic, so I don't actually get to have them, and so this is all I get. I get to have the Siamese cat that stares at me. Okay, enough about me being sad and pathetic, and on to a discussion of this week's Cat Who book. This week's Cat Who book is The Cat Who Went Underground, and we are back to the Cat Who series proper. This is, so we're back to Jim Qwillerin. This is the first book in the series. Now, you may remember when I did 14 Tales, I mentioned that there's a lot of supernatural stuff. There's an alien in 14 Tales, there's ghosts, there's a cat who uses her psychic abilities to make her human pets remember that a stranger came to visit their home. This book, and honestly, I haven't looked into Lilian Jackson Braun, so I don't know how much of this is her natural inclination or beliefs and how much of this is just her putting together an interesting plot. But this book has a psychic who makes accurate predictions, a shockingly accurate series of horoscopes, and a woman who discussed having probably the ghost of her cat come to her door and scratch on it to wake her up so that she doesn't, so that she would find out that there were, burglars in her house and stuff like that. But The Cat Who Went Underground, it opens with Qwillerin deciding that he wants to go back to the cabin that he stayed in when he first came up to Moose County. You may recall, back when he first came up there at Aunt Fanny's invitation, that he stayed in a cabin and, he found it peaceful and very, very nice. And he decides that after he spent several years in Pickaxe, he decides he's going to try to head out to the cabin. And so he does, except that things in the cabin keep breaking again and again and again, and he winds up being referred to Glinko. And Glinko runs a sort of a repair network where there's a woman who basically handles everything, and she's kind of like the hub, and you call her and she sends somebody out to your place to fix stuff. And it's all extremely casually handled, and she's inordinately amused when Qwillerin talks about her dispatching people and that sort of thing, because, she phones somebody and says, "Little Joe, go out there and fix his broken sink." It's through Glinko that we meet Little Joe, who is not in fact a man. Joe is short for Joanne. This is one of the times when the fact that this book is now set in the 1970s, was begun in the 1960s, and that Qwillerin is in his 50s in the 1970s. That shows up a little bit more because, much like in the first couple books where there are references to the inevitable girl reporter, in this everybody is surprised and several of them are vaguely appalled at the idea that there's a woman plumber. And the interesting thing, of course, is that at the same time as there is this woman plumber thing, which is frequently objected to by Mildred Hanstable, who feels aggravated that everybody acts like a woman can't be a plumber because goodness knows the manual dexterity needed to use a wrench is just beyond women. She gets extremely aggravated over this, but at the same time, there's a lot of interesting talk, especially when Qwillerin interviews several elderly people over the course of this in search of material for what will become one of the ongoing themes of the series, which is his his column. He has become a once-a-week columnist in the Moose County Something newspaper, if you'll recall from a while back now, that Moose County, upon getting a Klingen Show and Fund funded newspaper, they couldn't think of what to call it. They were like, well, it could be the Moose County Clarion, the Moose County Chronicle, and when they put a big banner on it calling it the Moose County something and asked people to vote, uh, in the last, well, 2 installments ago, if you're counting 14 Tales, uh, book in the series, everybody had voted for the paper to be the Moose County something. So it's now the Moose County something, and Qwillerin writes the Qwill pen, spelled like his name, Qwill. And that's one of the ongoing themes of the series, will be Qwillerin looking for things to write about. And so he interviews several people and looks into several things over the course of this book in search of topics for the Qwill pen. And back to the topic that I was on, including a woman who talks about how she went to so-called normal school, which was what they called teaching school at the time, because her family needed to be extremely respectable, and teaching was one of the few respectable professions for a woman, which we all know because, well, teaching was one of the few respectable positions for a woman. That's why governesses were so often women, because it was one of the few respectable positions that paid somewhat decently. But as we go through this, the book starts off with people talking about with the death of a carpenter who apparently fell into a river and drowned. And then when Qwillerin meets little Joanne, she tells him that her father died unexpectedly, and people talk about a man who died when the back of his pickup truck managed to fall down and drop something heavy on him. And then a nice young man who Qwillerin had hired to build an addition onto his cabin vanishes. And as this goes on, Qwillerin becomes more and more suspicious that something is happening, because you just have all of these people, and they're all carpenters, they're all woodworkers, they're all people in effect renovations. They're all dying and vanishing, and it's really kind of suspicious. And at the same time, nearly every single chapter opens with some dire statement about how if only Qwillerin had read his horoscope that morning, it would have told him. By the end of the book, Qwillerin is actually calling Mildred Hanstable, saying, "What's the horoscope say today?" In the second last chapter, he gets 2 newspapers and reads the horoscopes on both of them, which, interestingly enough, give him conflicting advice. One of which says, "Give it up and get out while the getting's good," and the other one says, "Hang in there a little longer, you'll get results." Which honestly speaks to me more about the genuine accuracy, or rather lack thereof, of horoscopes than anything else. But we actually get a callback to a previous book. The Cat Who Saw Red actually is the callback, when Qwillerin is talked into visiting a psychic, and the psychic tells him that he's got a message from some woman named Joy. And if you'll recall, Joy was the woman who was his childhood sweetheart that he met in The Cat Who Saw Red, which is the woman who was murdered by her husband and turned into a glaze. I continue to find that to genuinely be the most disturbing book. In this one, the killer is suffering from what is perhaps a bit of a trite cliche, the abused person suffering from multiple personality disorder. But then again, I don't know how much of a cliche that was in 1988 when this was published. I think it was 1988. I would have to check, but unfortunately, I had to get this in ebook form, and the ebook is on the tablet, which also has my timer, so checking is perhaps dangerous. Um, so the thing about this book is that, unlike many books, 1989, there it is. Um, Unlike some of the books in this series, this book is really just a massive series of misadventures. You know, Qwillerin winds up getting spider bites. He winds up getting sort of turned around as he, goes bicycling. He gets stuck on an island in the middle of a massive storm, and part of his cabin gets ripped up by a tornado. And also Arch Riker, who had gotten engaged to Amanda Goodwinter, who is possibly the most foul-tempered human being on the face of the planet, has broken the engagement off. So there you go. But Qwillerin just has misadventure after misadventure. Everything in his house constantly breaks. He spends the whole summer, like his whole time, out in that cabin, calling Glinkos to come and fix his radiator, fix the heating stove, fix the chimney, fix the sink, fix the toilet. Um, and so we see a lot of Glinko, we hear a lot from Glinko, or rather Mrs. Glinko, but we also get to know Mildred Hanstable better. And the thing about this is that this follows the Cat Who formula. Qwillerin moves to a new place, or winds up in a new place, or does a new thing, and winds up dealing with some colorful characters, and his cat helps him solve the mystery. And indeed, Coco does, mostly by getting himself lost in the crawl space under the house. But the thing about this is that this is much more typical of these later Cat Who books. There's a very stable set of people around Qwillerin now. It's not just Arch Riker and Percy who we recognize, but Arch Riker and Mildred Hanstable and Lori Bamba and her husband, yes, Nick Bamba, and Roger McGilvery, who is Mildred Hanstable's son, and Roger's wife, Sue, and he places a call to Don Exbridge asking for people to come out, and so on and so on. We've got this cast of characters that are now stable and have really and are staples of the whole series. We don't see Junior Goodwinter, although he is a regular of the series. We don't see Hixie Rice, although she is a regular. But as I said, there's Mildred and Roger, and you come to know these people. This is a long-term series that is now settling solidly into its place. It's now giving us these people that we've come to know, these people that Qwillerin knows, that he has come to recognize, and that he's come to settle into the rhythm of small-town life and to appreciate the advantages of being in a place where everybody knows you. He, of course, regularly still notes the disadvantages of being in a place that isn't as large as a large city, and also, of course, the disadvantages of having everybody know you. But this is really where we are getting some very, very typical work of this series. This isn't as light as some other books in the series, and I don't think it's her best, but this is the book where you can see the groove that we're settling into. And I'll see you next week.